Hello, everyone. It is me again. I'm trying to get that weird light out of the way. Uh, all right, so I've made a video explaining where Tempest resources are on our Brightspace page and what the assignment is for the duration of the play. One post per act of your thoughts on one of the questions or something else, and then going back and responding to two other students. That's per act. Okay, I want to give you some general observations of my own about Act One and Act Two. I won't get super detailed at this point. With each act, I might get a little bit more detailed, but I just kind of want to see what you all think before I get really lectury and detailed about it. So, in Act One, things get set up. We learn it starts out with a shipwreck, and a bunch of noble folk are washed ashore. They're afraid they're going to die. We learn from Prospero that he has enchanted the ship in order to wash everybody ashore. And then he explains to his daughter how they've been betrayed. I don't think I'll do a big plot summary here. There are other plot summaries available to you in the materials that I've already put up. But there are a few thematic things that I want to point out. So one of the things that's really interesting to me, I'm just going to keep doing this until I cover that light with my giant hair. There we go. One of the things that's really interesting to me is the fact that Prospero ends up in the situation that he's in part because he was supposed to be in charge of Milan and he gave up some of his civic responsibilities in order to study, right? He's like, I loved my books. I wanted to hole up in my, office and read my books. And so I put my brother in charge. And then that kind of leads to a cascade of trouble for him. And one of the things that I think Shakespeare is always really interested in, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute, is that he's really interested in the fact that we belong to societies, right? And we have responsibilities not just to our private interests and desires, but to our place in the world, to the people around us. And so it's worth thinking about whether or not this is a commentary on not learning, because obviously Shakespeare was a book learning guy, and there's ways that we're supposed to admire Prospero, but did he abandon perhaps his responsibilities to the world that he belongs to, right? We belong to the world as much as the world belongs to us. And so that's something that is worth perhaps thinking about. I'm looking at a script now. Sorry, I keep kind of moving my eyeballs away. The other thing that's really interesting to me in this act is that we learn some things about how Prospero treats the people on the island, including his daughter. Right? He has learned so much from his books that he has magical powers, and one of the things that he is able to do is control Ariel, who is a spirit who he freed from a sorceress witch, and he controls Caliban, who was born on the island and who he treats as a slave. He also orchestrates everything that happens, right? He orchestrates the wreck. He orchestrates the meeting between Miranda, his daughter, and Ferdinand, and then pretends to be mad about it. Like he's moving all the pieces around. And so is he a nice fellow? Is he controlling? What's his problem? Okay, there's a couple of scenes I think that are worth looking at really quickly. I'm using the PDF. Let me drop my head out of the way here. Okay, this is in Act One, and this is a big thing that people were really interested in with this play, which is the way he treats Caliban versus how he treats Ariel, because he threatens Ariel with torture a couple of times, but he also promises, I'll set you free when this is over. With Caliban, there is no such promise. That is an interesting difference. And so this scene is where we learn that Caliban was there first. This island's mine by Sycorax, my mother, which thou takest from me. Caliban was there first. And remember, this is a time, early colonialism, right? This is not a fantasy. I mean, even though it's an imaginary island. And in this scene, we learn that Caliban showed all the good stuff to Prospero, right? Not unlike indigenous people teaching visitors how not to starve to death. And Prospero says, like, I was super kind to you until you sought to violate the honor of my child, which is bad. But this is a scene where we learn, and it's a famous scene where we learn about this conflict between Caliban and Prospero. Caliban feels unjustly like his place has been stolen, even though he tried to be a good servant. Prospero is constantly threatening him with torture. You'll wake up with cramps, with pinches, right? You'll do what I want. And then Miranda says, I tried to be nice to you. I gave you language. I tried to teach you how to speak. And there's a famous line here where Caliban says, you taught me language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse, right? You've given me these tools, and now I'm going to use them against you. So the question of Caliban as a colonial subject is really interesting, and the interpretation of him obviously changes over time, right? Do we see this differently now in the present than we might have seen it, or Shakespeare's original audience might have seen it? Okay, so that's one scene that I quite like. And so the most obvious way that he controls people is through torture, threats. He even threatens Miranda, right? If you don't do what I say, I will hate you, right? He controls her access to information. He's constantly knocking people out to sleep without their consent. And so one interesting question is, to what extent is Prospero's control of his environment a problem? Okay, so that's just a general thing I'm going to say about Act 1. I do want to say one other thing about a theme that comes up a lot in a play, mostly because I just want to talk about a passage that I really love. A theme throughout the play is also transformation. What happens when we are changed by things that we pick, like learning and becoming a magic person, or when we are changed by things that we didn't pick, right? Or fate. Was it fate for Caliban that this is the island that Prospero washed up on? Was it fate that made Prospero's brother and advisors turn against him, right? We are subject to things that we don't get to control, and we are changed by them. And so I just want to point out this. This is Ariel's song, and it's sometimes productions make it into an actual song, which I don't like, even though original audiences would have loved a lot of singing and things. But I'll just read it. Full fathoms 5, thy father lies. He's talking to Ferdinand, who thinks his father is dead, which is pretty brutal. Of his bones are corals made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. There's more, but that's the part I like, because it suggests that even transformations that seem final are not, right? Everything becomes something else. If you're Ferdinand and you think your father has died, this is cold comfort, but this idea of transformation is prevalent throughout the play. Art transforms things, and so does magic, but so does greed, and so does remorse, and so does forgiveness, right? There's a kind of instability to the state that people are in. So I just wanted to point that out also. I think it's lovely. Okay, those are my thoughts on Act 1. I'm going to switch to Act 2 here in just a minute. Okay, I'm going to do this again. So I want to say a few things now about Act 2. I actually find the beginning of this act difficult, and I'll recommend either the production, the movie version, or the No Fear Shakespeare, and here's why. The first chunk of it is Gonzalo is being kind of trite and reassuring. I mean, Gonzalo is an interesting character because he's a little bit naive, and he's a little bit long-winded, and he's kind of annoying, but he's really good. Like, he's not clever, but he's good, which is interesting because Prospero is very clever, and so are some of his enemies, right? And being clever doesn't automatically mean good. But Gonzalo is talking a lot, and Antonio and Sebastian are making fun of him. And it's actually a little bit, for me, I found it a little bit confusing because it's a lot of puns. It's a little bit hard to follow on the page. And so perhaps and the No Fear Shakespeare might help with some of that. So that part gets a little confusing, but they're walking behind him, making fun of him. And so some of the sick Elizabethan burns are a little bit hard to follow. Then a little bit later, Sebastian and Antonio are conspiring against the king, but they're doing it in a way where they're trying to not say out loud what they want to do. So they are talking in code and suggestion and hints, and that is also a little bit hard to follow on purpose, right? Because none of them want to say directly what it is. That part is also a little hard to follow. So if you find that you, at the beginning of Act 2, are really frustrated, it's actually frustrating and it's not you. So maybe the No Fear Shakespeare is the way to go with that. So just keep that in mind. I wanted to point that out. There are two things that I'm interested in for you to maybe think about in this act. At one point, as I was saying about Act 1, Shakespeare is really interested in ways that maybe are specific to his time about the importance of being connected to a social world, having responsibility to the role that you were born into and to the people around you. And so there's this interesting scene where Gonzalo says, if I was the king of this place, everything would be different, right? He describes a utopia. He describes a world that's very different from the one that he is from and the one that he lives in. So let me show you that one. And this is in Act 2. Let me get my face out of the way. Okay, so Gonzalo, and he's not ambitious, he's just talking, right? Gonzalo has no wish to overthrow anybody, but he's just talking. And he says right about here that if he were the king, he would execute things so that there's no traffic, no name of magistrate, letters would not be known, riches, poverty, and use of service, none, contract succession. I don't need to read it all to you, but he's basically saying this would be a place where people are, as it says, idle, innocent, and pure. There won't be any hierarchy. There won't be money. There won't be work. It'll just be like everybody just has everything they need and just kind of they hang out, right? No occupation, all men idle, all, and women too, but innocent and pure, no sovereignty, right? And then they kind of make fun of him about it. All things in common nature should produce without sweat or endeavor. Treason, felony, sword, pike, knife, gun, or need of any engine would I not have, but nature should bring forth of its own kind, right? All poison, all abundance to feed my innocent people. So basically he's saying, I am imagining a utopia where nature provides everything we need. We don't need social organization. We don't need hierarchy. We don't need work. We can just all be together in a state of nature and it will be wonderful. So I'd like you to think maybe about whether you think that would work, whether or not Shakespeare thinks it would work. And then, they are on an island where they have everything they need, kind of what happens. So that's one thing that I think is really interesting about Act 2. And then there is not a repetition, but there's a repeat of this theme of the relationship between Caliban and Prospero. Yes, Prospero is really cruel to Caliban because perhaps Caliban tried to rape his daughter. Let's be super explicit about that. But there is a scene a little bit later that suggests the idea that the natives you find on an island are available for exploitation, and cruelty is repeated in this very played for comedy encounter later in the act. Oh, wait, I don't need to scroll. I've got it right here. Okay. This is still Act 2, Caliban, and let me make sure I'm in the right place. I'm sorry. Trinculo comes across Caliban in a storm. Thank you for your patience. I'm almost done. And he can't figure out Caliban's under like a tarp, and he can't figure out if he's alive, if he's a fish, or if he's a monster. And he realizes that he's alive and a creature. And then he's like, I wish, and I'm right here. This is a strange fish. Were I in England now, as I once was, and had but this fish painted, not a holiday fool there would give a piece of silver. There would this monster make a man, meaning if I could haul this monster to England, I could charge for people to look at him and it would make a man, which would make me rich. Any strange beast there makes a man. People love to pay for seeing weird oddities. When they will not give a doit, it's a currency, to relieve a lame beggar, they will lay out 10 to see a dead Indian. So he's saying that we bring oddities from far away and people will just pay to see them because they're weird. And so he's immediately like, I can make money off of this weird creature that I found here, whether he wants to go to England with me or not, right? And this is clearly already a practice in the culture because it's made it into the play, right? 'Tis not a fish, but an islander. He's like, cool, I can use this anyway. This happens again, just a few scenes ahead. Right here, Stefano shows up and he kind of is having this funny encounter and it's supposed to be funny and he's giving Caliban alcohol. And he says right here, he's in his fit now, which means he's getting drunk, and does not talk after the wisest. He shall taste of my bottle, I'll get him drunk. If he have never drunk wine before, it will go near to remove his fit. He'll love it. If I can recover him and keep him tame, I will not take too much for him. He shall pay for him that hath him, and that soundly. Sorry, I might be in the wrong place. No, I'm in the right place. But essentially, he's like, oh, here it is. If I can recover him and keep him tame and get to Naples with him, he's a present for any emperor that ever trod on neat's leather. So basically, I apologize for being in the wrong place. It's like being in class with me. He's like, if I can, this is a living creature. I don't quite know what it is yet. I'm going to get him drunk. I'm going to tame him, and I'm going to use him to impress an important person back in Naples. So both Prospero, who's high up, and these two lowly guys who are playing for comedy see Caliban as a resource to be exploited. And so this is something that comes up throughout. And we'll talk in Act 3 of whether Caliban turns the tables and uses these two bozos. But those are kind of the big things that I wanted to bring up about Act 1 and Act 2. I'm going to let you guys, really get in there and kind of have thoughts of your own, of course, about this, because I know that you'll come up with some great stuff. So this is one of the full text versions of the play that you can use. I like these kind of marginal questions. But remember, the No Fear Shakespeare can help a lot in a nicely organized way with some of the places where the language is a little unclear. This version does have notes, but you have to scroll to the bottom of the page and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That's Act 1 and Act 2. More will be forthcoming about later acts. Hopefully this was helpful just to get you started. And while it is not easy necessarily at first to kind of think of connections between the Tempest and the world right now, there is something about transformation and trying to navigate new situations that might feel relevant. I don't know. But the language is beautiful even when it's challenging, and it's good to have a little Shakespeare. So I'm going to stop this now. Again, don't panic if this feels overwhelming. And I say that not because I don't think you all can do it, because I know that you can, but I know that these are very difficult and strange times with unexpected distractions. And even if it seems like you should just be able to concentrate in the way that you normally can, like maybe you can. I mean, I'm struggling with that too. It's just everything feels very weird. So be patient with yourselves. Ask me questions. I'm doing everything I can to be patient with you. And you guys have been really patient with me about getting this stuff set up. So I appreciate it. I miss being in a class with you. I don't like that we have to do it this way. But keeping everybody safe is a good plan. Okay, stay tuned for more as we get into it. And take care, everybody.